It was a dreary, rainy morning in the small town of Bradford. Detective Steven Reid sipped his coffee and stared out the precinct window at the gray skies and puddles forming on the streets. He had a feeling it was going to be a long day. As if on cue, Officer Mendez knocked on his door. "Detective, we've got a robbery down at Clancy's general store. Owner says the safe was cleared out overnight." Reid sighed and grabbed his coat. "All right, let's go take a look. Hopefully it's an open and shut case." 15 minutes later, Reid pulled up in front of Clancy's. The owner, a stout, balding man named Bill Clancy, waved him over as soon as he stepped out of the car. "Thank goodness you're here, Detective," Clancy exclaimed. "I came in this morning to open up shop and found my office ransacked and the safe empty. They took everything, over $5,000 in cash." Reid nodded as he surveyed the scene. Muddy boot prints led from a side entrance, through the aisles to the back office and the open safe, then back out again. "Seems pretty straightforward. We'll dust for prints, interview your employees, see if anyone saw or heard anything suspicious. With such a small town, shouldn't be too hard to find the perp." "Actually," Clancy said hesitantly, "I was thinking this case might warrant special help." Reid narrowed his eyes. "Special help? What do you mean?" "Well, you know those two famous detectives who sometimes consult on tough cases? Burke and Jackson Marks? Word is they're vacationing not far from here. I thought maybe—" Reid held up a hand. "Mr. Clancy, I appreciate the suggestion, but I assure you my department is more than capable of handling a simple robbery like this. Burke and Marks have much bigger fish to fry." Just then, Reid heard a commotion outside. He stepped out to find two men arguing with Officer Mendez. "I'm telling you, we're expected," the taller of the two insisted. He was lean and sharp-featured with intelligent eyes. "Detective Reid requested our assistance." "I most certainly did not," Reid said firmly, striding over. "And you two would be?" The man smiled and extended a hand. "Jackson Marks, and this is my partner, Burke. A pleasure to make your acquaintance, Detective." Reid grudgingly shook his hand. "Can't say the same, considering you're crashing my crime scene. What are you two even doing in Bradford?" "Vacationing," Burke said with a wry grin. He was shorter and stouter than Marks, with an impish glint in his eye. "But it seems crime follows us wherever we go. When we heard there was a baffling robbery—" "It's not baffling," Reid cut in. "It's actually quite simple. But by all means, come see for yourselves so you can be on your way." He led the two detectives into the store, past the taped-off aisles to the back office and the open safe. Marks immediately crouched down, examining the muddy boot prints with a magnifying glass. Interesting," he murmured. "You said it seems simple, Detective Reid, but already I'm seeing signs this was no ordinary thief." Reid crossed his arms. "Oh, do tell." Marks stood up and began pacing. "The safe, for one, is an older model but still quite complex. Your average petty criminal couldn't crack it. This was either an expert or someone very familiar with this particular safe." "Like an employee," Burke chimed in. Reid nodded grudgingly. "We're looking into that angle. Anything else, Sherlock?" Marks didn't seem to catch the sarcasm. "Yes, actually. Take a look at these boot prints. Notice anything peculiar about the gait and size?" Reid studied the muddy tracks and slowly shook his head. "No, but I'm sure you're about to enlighten me. This thief walks with a lightness and grace more characteristic of a woman than a man," Marks explained. "And the boots are at least 2 sizes too big for the wearer, likely a woman's small feet in men's large boots, judging by the depth of the toe indentation in the mud compared to the heel." "Hang on," Reid said. "How could you possibly know it's a woman?" "The hips, my good man," Marks said. "Men and women have differently shaped pelvic bones which affect their manner of walking. This gait is unmistakably feminine. Furthermore, I'd estimate her height to be around 5 feet 4 inches based on the stride length." Reid exchanged a dubious glance with Officer Mendez. This Marks guy was either brilliant or completely off his rocker, but he had to admit the theory was intriguing. A female thief intentionally wearing oversized men's boots in a sloppy attempt to throw off suspicion. Well, detective? Burke prompted with a smug grin. What's our next move? I assume you'll want to round up all of Clancy's employees for questioning. Reid sighed heavily. He hated to admit it, but he was out of his depth here. Though he still didn't completely buy Mark's deductions, he couldn't deny the man had an impressive eye for detail. Maybe it wouldn't hurt to let Marks and Burke tag along, just until this case was closed.
All right. Fine Reid relented.
Officer Mendez, please gather Mr. Clancy's staff, paying particular attention to any women around 5 feet 4 inches with small feet. Let me know as soon as they're assembled at the station. Mendez nodded and headed out. Reid turned back to Marks and Burke. Looks like we'll be working together after all. But let me be clear, I'm the lead on this case. You two are merely consultants. Of course, detective, Marks said agreeably. Your case, your rules. Isn't that right, Holden? Burke shrugged. It's your show, Reid. We're just along for the ride. And to dazzle you with our deductive prowess, naturally. Reid rolled his eyes. Come on, let's head down to the station. With any luck, one of Clancy's employees will crack under questioning, and we can put this whole mess behind us. An hour later, Clancy's entire staff, all 6 of them, were assembled in the Bradford police station's small interview room. Reid stood at the front while Marks and Burke observed from the back. Thank you all for coming down, Reid began. As you know, there was a robbery at the store early this morning. The safe was cleaned out and we found muddy boot prints at the scene. If anyone has any information about the incident or noticed any suspicious activity, now's the time to speak up. Silence greeted his words as the employees glanced nervously at each other. Reid sighed inwardly. This was going to be like pulling teeth. He opened his mouth to start questioning them one by one, when Marks suddenly emerged from the back of the room. Pardon me, detective, but I couldn't help noticing some of these muddy boot prints tracked in here to the station. It seems your thief may have just walked themselves right into an interrogation. A murmur rippled through the room as all eyes fell to the floor. Sure enough, there was a trail of drying mud leading into the room and congregating around the feet of one employee in particular. A woman Reid saw around 5 feet 4 inches with a slim build. She was visibly trembling. Well, Burke said, coming to stand beside Marks. How about that? Looks like we found our soggy-footed suspect. The woman, Reid thought her name was Valerie, shook her head frantically. No, you don't understand. These aren't my boots. I mean, they're my ex-boyfriend's boots. He left them at my place and I didn't have any other shoes this morning, and I was running late, and she trailed off as Reid approached, his face grim. Valerie, is it? I'm going to need you to come with me. We're going to have a little chat about your whereabouts early this morning. As Reid led a protesting Valerie out of the room, Marks turned to Burke with a puzzled frown. Something doesn't add up, Marks murmured. A woman that slight wearing her boots that oversized? She'd have been clomping around like a clown. And the way she walked in, too timid and clumsy for our nimble thief. Burke nodded. So you think she's being set up? By whom? That, Marks said, eyeing the remaining employees shrewdly, is exactly what we need to find out. Discreetly, as the staff filed out of the room, Marks and Burke lingered behind. Marks walked over to the muddy tracks and crouched to examine them. Look here, Holden. Notice anything odd about the distribution of mud? Burke peered over his shoulder with a frown. Now that you mention it, it does seem like there's an awful lot of mud caked on. Almost like someone intentionally stomped around in a puddle before walking in here, Marks finished, hoping the muddy tracks would draw attention to our hapless Valerie. But who would want to frame her for the robbery? Burke wondered. And why? That's what we need to find out, Marks said, straightening up. I have a hunch, but we'll need to do some digging. Discreetly question the other employees. Look into their backgrounds. See if anyone has a motive to set Valerie up and rob the store. You think the real thief is one of Clancy's other workers, Burke said. It wasn't a question. Marks nodded grimly. It's the only explanation that fits all the facts. Now we just need to figure out who. and prove it before an innocent woman takes the fall. They exited the interview room to find the police station bustling with activity. Reid was ensconced in his office, no doubt grilling Valerie. The other employees milled around anxiously, darting furtive glances at each other. Marks and Burke split up and started mingling, keeping their inquiries seemingly casual, just friendly out-of-towners making small talk. But all the while, they were studying faces, body language, interactions, filing away every detail for later analysis. As the day wore on, a clearer picture began to emerge. Clancy's assistant manager, Eric Kendall, was young and shy, but universally well-liked. Word was Clancy had been grooming him to take over the business. This hadn't sat well with some of the other employees, especially Janet Hawkins, Marks said as he and Burke reconvened in a quiet corner. 5 years as a cashier and passed over for a promotion in favor of Eric. According to Mandy on Produce, Janet has quite the temper. Not above holding a grudge. Burke nodded. And did you see her hands? Calluses on the thumb and forefinger. Common in lockpickers. Safe cracking isn't exactly picking, but it suggests she might know her way around locks and tumblers. Marks smiled slowly. Well, motive and means. Think we have enough to go to Reid? Not quite, Burke said. We still need opportunity, and more to the point, we need evidence. Something more incriminating than a little finger callus. They lapsed into thoughtful silence for a moment. Then Marks snapped his fingers. Security cameras. Stores like this always have a CCTV system. If we can get a look at last night's footage, we might just catch our real thief red-handed. Burke finished, eyes gleaming. I like the way you think, partner. Let's go have a word with Clancy. 20 minutes later, they were ensconced in Clancy's back office, fast-forwarding through grainy security cam footage. Clancy hovered nervously behind them. I don't know what you boys expect to find, he said. The system only covers the main floor, not the hallways or my office. If the thief came in the side like you suspect. Shoo! Burke hushed him, eyes fixed on the screen. There. What was that? Marks hit pause and rolled it back a few frames. A hooded figure could be seen moving quickly down the canned food aisle, a large paper bag in hand. They kept their head down, face obscured, but a few wisps of unmistakable red hair escaped the edges of the hood. I'll be damned, Clancy breathed. That's Janet. What in the world is she doing? On the screen, Janet crept out of frame. A minute later, she reappeared empty-handed. Marks switched to a different camera and caught her hurrying out the front entrance, glancing furtively over her shoulder. She must have stashed the loot in that bag somewhere and ditched it outside, Burke said, probably planning to collect it later once the heat died down. Marks was already pulling out his phone. I'm sending this footage to Reid. Hopefully he hasn't booked Valerie yet. Half an hour later, a shame-faced Janet Hawkins sat cuffed in an interrogation room down at the station. Marks and Burke watched through the one-way glass as Reid laid out the irrefutable evidence from the security tapes. You almost had us fooled with those muddy boots, Reid told her, shaking his head. Trying to frame Valerie, throw suspicion off yourself. But you didn't count on a couple of hotshot consultants picking apart your little charade. In the observation room, Burke elbowed Marks with a grin. Hear that, Jackson? We're hotshots. As if there were ever any doubt, Marks replied with an answering smile. Though I must say, I'll be glad to get back to our so rudely interrupted vacation. Just then, Clancy burst into the room, beaming. I don't know how to thank you, fellas. You saved my store, and more importantly, you saved an innocent gal from getting in a mess of trouble. He vigorously pumped their hands. I hope this doesn't put too much of a crimp in your vacation. Tell you what, you ever need anything from my shop, it's on the house. Least I can do. That's very kind of you, Mr. Clancy, Marks said. But the knowledge of a job well done is reward enough for us. Though we wouldn't say no to a couple of cold beers, Burke added with a wink. Clancy laughed. You got it, boys. Beers are on me tonight down at Flanagan's pub. And if any more trouble comes a-knockin', you can bet I'll be calling on the famous Burke and Marks to kick it out on its rear. As Clancy left to give his statement to Reid, Marks and Burke looked at each other and shrugged. Well, at this rate, I doubt we'll make that movie, Marks lamented. Nah, Burke said, throwing an arm around his partner's shoulders. But that's all right. Reckon real life is proving more interesting than fiction lately anyhow. Long as you're along for the ride. Marks smiled ruefully. Indubitably old chum. Though next time, what say we pick a vacation spot with a slightly lower crime rate? Oh, where's the fun in that? Burke scoffed. Face it, Jackson. You'd be bored to tears lounging on some beach. Solving mysteries is simply what we do. Marks sighed theatrically. I suppose you're right, as usual. In that case, lead on, Sherlock. The game, it seems, is perpetually afoot. With that, the two detectives strode out of the station, ready as ever to tackle whatever twisty case came their way next. The day and their inimitable partnership had been saved.